Breaking news. Europe's bold move to ban Russian gas has backfired spectacularly, as LNG imports from Russia have now hit a record high, sending shockwaves through the continent's energy markets and political circles. Across Europe, factories that once hummed with activity now stand eerily silent. The lights are out, machines are idle, and workers have been sent home. Meanwhile, massive LNG tankers, many flying the Russian flag, quietly dock at European ports, unloading their precious cargo. The question on everyone's mind, has the ban already been broken, or was it ever truly enforced? In February 2026, this dramatic headline dominated news cycles, flashing across televisions in homes, cafes, and public squares. It captured the anxiety and confusion of a continent facing an energy crisis it thought it had avoided. European leaders had stood before cameras, promising to cut off Russian natural gas in response to Moscow's aggression. But behind the scenes, the data told a very different story. Charts and graphs revealed a steady, even accelerating flow of Russian LNG into Europe, defying the spirit of the ban. Instead of shrinking, Russian LNG imports were surging to unprecedented levels. European ports bustled with activity as tankers from Russia's Yamal and Ust-Luga terminals arrived one after another, their holds brimming with liquefied gas. This outcome was never supposed to happen. After Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Europe had made a historic vow to end its dependence on Russian energy, to stand in solidarity with Ukraine, and to strike at the heart of Moscow's war chest. Politicians delivered stirring speeches about energy freedom and security, promising a new era of independence. But as the months passed, the reality was starkly different. Factories shuttered, electricity bills soared, and yet, Russian LNG tankers kept arriving at record rates, undermining the very goals leaders had set. Ordinary citizens, already struggling with rising costs, watched the news in disbelief. Many asked, had the ban failed completely? Why were Russian gas profits climbing higher than ever, even as Europe claimed to be cutting ties? From the industrial heartlands of Rotterdam to the warehouses of Barcelona, these questions echoed through empty buildings and silent production lines. The sense of uncertainty and frustration grew with each passing day. As winter's chill set in, the crisis forced a harsh reckoning. For all the ambitious laws, climate targets, and impassioned speeches, the energy market responded only to the relentless forces of supply and demand, and the unforgiving cold of a European winter. Europe's historic gamble to break free from Russian energy was not unfolding as planned. Instead, it exposed the continent's deep vulnerabilities, leaving leaders and citizens alike to wonder what comes next in this high-stakes energy standoff. In 2023, the European Commission made headlines across the globe by announcing a bold and unprecedented plan to phase out Russian natural gas imports entirely by 2027. This was not just a policy shift, it was a direct response to the geopolitical tensions and energy vulnerabilities exposed by the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. The move signaled a dramatic turning point in Europe's energy strategy, aiming to reduce dependence on a single supplier and strengthen the continent's energy security for the future. The new law cast a wide net, targeting both the traditional pipeline gas delivered by Nord Stream and other routes, as well as liquefied natural gas, or LNG, which arrives by massive ships from Russian ports. This comprehensive approach was designed to close every possible loophole, ensuring that Russian gas could not simply be rerouted or rebranded to bypass the restrictions. The legislation set out a series of staggered, ambitious deadlines. By January 2024, European companies were forbidden from signing any new contracts for Russian LNG. This was the first major step, intended to immediately halt the expansion of Russian gas influence in the European market. The next milestone came quickly. By January 2025, the EU demanded a 50% reduction in Russian gas imports compared to 2021 levels. This required not only cutting back on purchases, but also finding alternative sources and ramping up storage and efficiency measures across member states. The final and most ambitious target was set for January 2027, near zero imports of Russian gas. By this date, the EU aimed to have almost completely severed its energy ties with Russia, marking the end of decades of reliance. The law was historic. In heated debates and emotional speeches, European Parliament members described it as the end of an era, a decisive break from the past. Many saw it as a necessary sacrifice for the sake of sovereignty and long-term stability, even as it posed significant challenges for industries and consumers. To support this transition, the Commission pledged massive investments in renewable energy, the construction of new pipelines to connect with alternative suppliers, and the development of modern infrastructure. Billions of euros were allocated for subsidies, research, and incentives to accelerate the shift toward wind, solar, and hydrogen, as well as to upgrade existing energy networks. But as with many sweeping reforms, the reality proved more complicated. Bans are always easier to declare than to enforce. European ports, bustling with activity, could still receive LNG shipments from almost anywhere. Traders, ever resourceful, found creative ways to relabel cargo, obscuring its true origin and slipping through regulatory cracks. Some nations like Spain and Belgium pushed back against the strictest measures. They lobbied for exceptions and loopholes, arguing that their own energy security and economic stability were at risk. These countries became vocal advocates for a more flexible approach, highlighting the complex balance between principle and practicality. By 2025, the cracks in the system were clear. Compliance was patchy at best, with some countries and companies finding ways around the rules. Enforcement lagged behind, hampered by bureaucracy and competing interests. Meanwhile, the European energy market, still hungry for affordable supply, continued to find and exploit gaps in the wall, revealing just how difficult it is to turn bold policy into everyday reality. Despite the official ban on Russian energy, imports of Russian LNG into Europe didn't just continue, they soared to unprecedented levels, catching many by surprise and raising eyebrows across the continent. In 2025, Europe imported a staggering 24.1 billion cubic meters of Russian LNG. This marked a 17% increase compared to 2023, defying expectations and highlighting the continent's ongoing dependence on Russian energy, even as political tensions remained high. By January 2026, the numbers reached new heights. Monthly imports hit all-time records, with 2.3 billion cubic meters of Russian LNG arriving in a single month. European ports bustled with activity as tankers lined up to unload their precious cargo, braving winter storms and icy seas. The driving force behind this surge was simple: price. Russian LNG was consistently cheaper, often selling at 10 to 15% below the rates offered by American or Qatari suppliers. For many European buyers, the economic incentive was too strong to ignore, especially as energy costs soared and budgets tightened. With traditional pipeline gas flows from Russia dwindling due to sanctions and political standoffs, LNG quickly became the lifeline for Europe's energy needs. Massive shipments moved from Russia's remote Arctic fields, navigating treacherous ice and long sea routes, to reach Europe's bustling terminals, where demand remained insatiable. But the journey wasn't always straightforward. Some shipments took a winding, almost labyrinthine route. LNG would depart from Yamal, make strategic stops in Turkey or Egypt, and then reappear in Spain or France, sometimes under the name of a completely different company. This complex web of transfers made it increasingly difficult to trace the true origin of the gas. For European regulators, tracking these shipments became a high-stakes cat-and-mouse game. Investigators pored over shipping documents, traced vessel movements on digital maps, and tried to untangle the ever-shifting paper trail, all in an effort to enforce the ban and maintain transparency. The numbers were a source of embarrassment for Brussels. Instead of shrinking, Russian gas revenues from Europe soared to 16.8 billion euros in 2025, almost double the levels seen before the ban. This surge in revenue highlighted the challenges of enforcing energy sanctions in a globalized market. In the end, the official ban was leaking, both literally and figuratively. Despite the best efforts of regulators and policymakers, Russian LNG continued to flow into Europe, fueling debate over the effectiveness of sanctions and the continent's true energy independence. Spain, France, and Belgium led the pack. In 2025, Spain imported 7.8 billion cubic meters of Russian LNG, France 6.4 billion, and Belgium 4.2 billion. Why? Each had its reasons. Spain's pipeline from Algeria was already maxed out. As heat waves drove up air conditioning use, Spanish utilities needed quick, flexible supply. French nuclear reactors were under repair, so France imported more LNG to make up the shortfall. Belgium became a trading hub. Russian LNG arrived at Zeebrugge, was stored, and then sold onward, sometimes to Germany or the UK. Some of it wasn't even used in Belgium itself. Smaller buyers like the Netherlands and Italy also played their part. For all these countries, the choice was stark: Russian LNG or blackouts. Energy security trumped politics, at least for now. Poland made a strategic pivot. Once just a transit country for Russian pipeline gas, it aimed to become Central Europe's energy hub. Warsaw launched a series of massive projects, expanding its Świnoujście LNG terminal, building a new floating unit at Gdansk, and doubling capacity on the Baltic pipe from Norway. By 2026, Poland boasted the region's largest LNG unloading capacity, over 9 billion cubic meters per year. It signed deals with the US, Qatar, and Norway, hoping to resell gas to neighbors like Slovakia, Czechia, and Ukraine. Poland even discussed building a second undersea cable to Sweden to export excess electricity when gas-fired plants ran. These moves were costly, over 6 billion euros in new investments, but gave Poland power. For the first time, it set prices for the region, not Moscow. Yet even here, Russian gas sometimes slipped through, relabeled or traded by global firms. Europe pinned big hopes on the East Med pipeline, a 1,900-kilometer project to bring Eastern Mediterranean gas from Israel, Cyprus and Egypt to Europe via Greece and Italy. In theory, it could deliver 10 billion cubic meters per year, enough to replace a chunk of Russian supply. But engineering and politics got in the way. Turkey opposed the route, demanding a share of transit fees and threatening blockades. Egypt and Israel argued over prices and taxation. Costs ballooned, from 7 billion euros to nearly 14 billion, as the seabed proved tougher than expected. By early 2026, only the Greek section was under construction. Delays meant no gas would flow before 2028 at the earliest. The dream of a Mediterranean lifeline was stuck in the sand. The 2022 sabotage of Nord Stream 1 and 2 marked an era of fear. Undersea explosions ripped through the Baltic Sea, cutting off a main artery of Russian gas to Germany. No one claimed responsibility. Russia blamed the West. NATO pointed to unknown actors. Investigations dragged on. This sabotage changed everything. European countries rushed to protect ports, pipelines, and power cables. Norway deployed naval patrols to guard its Arctic gas lines. Insurance costs for LNG tankers doubled. The threat wasn't just Russian gas, it was all energy infrastructure. New security drills and cyber defense programs sprang up, but the basic vulnerability remained. Europe needed energy, and energy moved through fragile tubes and wires. The energy crunch hit hard. By late 2025, electricity prices averaged 190 euros per megawatt hour, triple the 2020 rate. Over 2,000 factories closed or idled across Germany, France, and Italy. Heavy industries, steel, chemicals, aluminum, were hit first. Unemployment in the industrial heartland soared. In the Ruhr, 70,000 jobs vanished in 6 months. Major companies like BASF and ArcelorMittal moved production abroad, to the US and Asia, where gas was cheap and stable. European output of fertilizers, glass and ceramics fell by 40%. Governments scrambled to offer subsidies, but budgets were stretched. Public anger grew. Politicians promised resilience, but the pain was real, and getting worse. Faced with shortages, Europe tried new routes. Greece expanded its Russian LNG terminal and built a new pipeline link to Bulgaria, but volumes were limited, only 2.5 billion cubic meters per year. Market reaction was lukewarm. Transport costs, unfamiliar contracts, and regulatory delays slowed progress. Meanwhile, business found shortcuts. Some Russian LNG was shipped to Cyprus, then regasified and piped to Egypt, where it was mixed with other gas and re-exported to Europe. This Cyprus-Egypt shortcut blurred the true origin, letting companies skirt the ban. In 2025, Europe paid 71 billion euros for imported gas, nearly half to Russia, even as leaders denied it. Storage tanks were full, but factories were empty. The laws were clear, but the market was clever. Can Europe ever truly quit Russian gas? As winter deepens and the lights flicker, the answer remains uncertain. For now, the gamble continues, and the cost keeps rising.